Welcome to another edition of James Martell's Coffee Talk, where James, successful publisher, speaker, and author of Online Success for Non-Techies, talks frankly and openly with experts from within the internet marketing industry about strategies and techniques you can use to develop a successful online presence for your personal or corporate brand. Here is your host, James Martell.
Yes, it's James Martell here, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk. Today I'm speaking with Carol Newman from the BioGirl Health Show about podcasting and how you too have the same opportunity to have a show of your own, allowing you to increase sales and build brand awareness. If you have an existing business, podcasting offers an exciting opportunity to share your stories and your passions to a growing audience, giving you a very unique opportunity to distance yourself from your competition by dramatically increasing your online web presence and doing it all in about 30 to 45 minutes per week. Carol is very passionate about women's health and truly believes, as she says, "My life's calling is to help women realize their full potential, achieve the best possible health, and embrace their true beauty." Carol lives in a small farming community of Richmond, Virginia, where she lives in a life that is close to the land as natural and organic as she can make it. Carol says, "Living here has been a large part of my lifelong pursuit of natural health and true beauty." Carol, thank you so much for joining me for Coffee Talk.
Oh, you're so welcome, James. Glad to be here. Very honored to be here.
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to be chatting with you about podcasting. And of course, I've had a chance to work with you very closely over the weeks and months, and specifically, really, what we're talking about is over the last couple of months here to help you launch your podcast. We did get an opportunity to help you with the BioGirlHealth.com website, which we had great fun in building out, and now we're adding a whole new level to it for you. And you have been just a trooper and just have done an amazing job with your podcast. I do know you've just completed, I believe it is podcast number 7. How's it been going?
Yeah, it's been going great. It's been a wonderful adventure, I must say. It was intimidating in the beginning, but once you get through that first one, it's easy. And I thought, well, if I can do PowerPoint presentations, I actually used to speak in a conference room with probably 100 or so people. And I thought, if I can do that, this should be a piece of cake because you're just recording at home over the computer. So it's not a big deal, and I highly recommend it because it will definitely increase your bottom line, and it's easy, and it doesn't take a lot of time, and we know time is valuable, so I'm encouraging those out there that it is doable, even with the little bit of time that we do have.
You mentioned a few great points there. Off the top, this idea of being a little bit intimidated by it. And I can remember myself as well back early on, just over 10 years ago, when Charles Johnson was encouraging me to do a podcast called The Affiliate Buzz, and how nervous I was. And you're right, once you get into it, how long would you say that it took, or have the butterflies completely gone away yet?
Actually, I would say after the second one, and it may have been maybe the first one, except for I couldn't get my Spreaker and Skype configured correctly because I bought a new computer, so I don't have a landline any longer, so I had to run down to my mom. She's like an hour from here, and of course I'm getting there and need to get everything, get situated with my notes and things like that. So, but I think that's what created the nerves more than actually doing the podcast. So
many listeners are considering doing a podcast of their own. They may have a health story to share. They may be very passionate about women's health or health and nutrition, or they may have had a success story when it comes to maybe a life-threatening illness. I've heard these stories over the years. Or they may be a brick-and-mortar business where a professional who possibly as a chiropractor or maybe an accountant, attorney, a nutritionist, anybody that is out there to increase their audience is something that this is something that they may or may not have considered. Now, in your particular case, You have a passion for women, and it comes through loud and clear on your show. And I do know that those people who have a discipline or a business that they're in, that they're really interested in helping people. Podcasting offers a really exciting opportunity for those type of people, doesn't it?
It sure does, and I've heard it said that it's just podcasting is blogging out loud. And the nice thing about it is you're doing something that you already have an interest in. So you're only talking about what you have an interest in, so it comes easily, and you're having a conversation back and forth. And so that takes away the nerves because you're talking with someone and you just feel like, okay, I'm having a conversation, just like if you're out to lunch with a friend and you're conversing back and forth. You just think of it that way, and it takes away the nerves. That's what happened to me anyway.
I'd like to talk about podcast syndication and really moving the podcast out into the web presence or out onto the net. And we talked about dramatically increasing your web presence through podcasting, and syndication is one way to do that. Broadcasting the podcast to the social networks, that's another way. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about your actual show and how your day looks, because typically it's around 30 to 45 minutes I've found to get organized for a podcast and actually complete the podcast. And my podcast is 30 minutes long. Yours is around 15 to 20 minutes in length. Take us through maybe the half hour leading up to the show, or the 15-minute lead up to the show, and then give us your experience working with the professional host.
Okay, first of all, I usually try to organize my show topics in advance. Say I have the 5 that I know I'm going to do. So that way, if you're organized, you're not scrambling, well, what is my topic going to be? So if you have 5 done ahead of time, then all you're doing is your research if you have to look anything up. But most of the information you should already know if that's your niche. So I usually prepare, probably getting all my notes organized. It might take me an hour, only because I like to do everything the old-fashioned way. Sometimes I'm just a pen and paper. And so that's why it will take a little longer. But usually I just like to go through my notes because I don't like to feel like I'm reading or I'm sounding like I'm not know what I'm saying. So I like to make sure that I organize my thoughts before I get on there. And then I talk with my host and run through it a little bit with her, maybe a minute or two, just to organize what she might say or what questions she's going to ask, just so the conversation is flowing.
Then with Kimberly, she, of course, is your host, Kimberly Henry. And
yes.
Listeners, if they go to BioGirlHealth.com, they'll see a nice big button on the homepage that'll take you right through to Carol's show. And you'll hear that Kimberly Henry is the host, and we organize the host for Carol. And talk about Kimberly. And now, and before you do that, I can actually tell, because I've had a chance to listen through all 7 of your shows, and the first one was very good, I must say, very good, especially for a first-time podcast, but just very good in general. And then I could feel you two connecting better and better right up until this very last show, where I could just tell you guys have just gelled. But talk about your experience working with a professional host.
Well, Kimberly is very professional, and if anyone gets a chance to listen to the podcast, her voice, she just has that professional sounding, almost like a DJ style voice, where she sounds relaxed and natural, and also she is able to wing it, where sometimes she just comes up with a good question that wasn't in the notes, or she has her own comment. After I'm finished answering a question, she has a comment related to what I was saying, and even though it may not be her interest, she's still always on top of it.
We also created a professional intro and an outro for you that has basically a really quick rundown of your story up front when listeners play. I believe it's around 20 seconds long, has some nice music within it. Then, of course, Kimberly comes on, and then the two of you have the conversation. And then at the end of it, we play a professional outro where you've got the music against sound effects. And at this point, it's basically an intro, or I would say a invitation to invite them back to your site, where they'll find out, of course, about the products and services that you're talking about, and all that you've covered in the particular show. And I personally find that really helps to give the show that extra edge, or that extra professional edge that many of the competitors don't. Now, when you're out there, and I know you've done this, you've gone and listened to other shows. Isn't it amazing how many of them don't take the extra step to have that professional intro and outro created?
Yes, and matter of fact, I was just listening to one the other day, and it's more apparent now that I'm doing podcast, and I do have the intro and outro, and I highly recommend to have that professionally done. And I also recommend to have a host, because initially I was just going to have a conversation with just myself talking and recording it, and it just doesn't come off as natural because you're not having a conversation one-on-one. You're just relaying information to the listeners, and so it's always easier when you're talking with someone. So that's what I would definitely recommend, to have a host and to also have an intro and outro professionally done. It just makes your whole show so much more professional. Like you said, it just gives it that extra edge.
We talked about dramatically increasing the web presence with podcasting, and it really does allow us to get the word out. And I do know, although we're handling it for you, you and I have had a chance to talk about a number of items. The podcasting directory. Spreaker, of course, is a podcasting directory, and your show is hosted there. And if those listeners would like to go directly to Spreaker.com and do a search for the BioGirl Health Show, they'll find your show there, or they'll find it, of course, in a variety of places online. And one of the things that we're working on with you now, and you've seen the emails coming into your inbox from these podcasting directories as we've been asking you to verify that you're submitting the show. This gives you the opportunity to have your show broadcast, or syndicated as they called it, out over many, many different podcasting directories. And to me, that's very exciting, because it's one thing to have the show on your site, and that's great. That gives you a great presence, and that's the hub of your entire business, is your website. But then also to have the show broadcast automatically each week to all of these podcasting directories, which also automatically creates a page for every episode of your show, really gives you an opportunity to dramatically increase the web presence. The other thing that's happening is we have this absolute explosion in smartphones and tablets, iPads, and Samsung has a new one, and just about every manufacturer now has a new type of a tablet. Have you had a chance to either see what your show looks like on Spreaker.com on an iPhone or a tablet yet?
I actually have, and my friend actually has a pretty nice size screen on his iPad, so it just looks like if I'm looking from my computer screen. But I haven't seen one on a smaller version.
They absolutely look beautiful. And what's so exciting about that, in addition to your listeners being able to access your show, of course, through your website or through the Spreaker.com website, Spreaker has an amazing app that can be downloaded into either an iPhone or an Android device, where they can now pull up your show on the device. And this is so key these days, because those listeners who are looking to really dramatically increase your online presence and really outdistance yourself from your competition, this gives you an edge over them that they probably won't even have on their radar screen, probably for years, if ever. And that is podcasting, because with the advent of these smartphones and these tablets and these devices being so prolific out there, they predict sometime next year in 2014, more people will access your website through their mobile devices than actually through their laptop or PC, because you're now because this app gives you that rich ability to have your show automatically show up beautifully on each of these devices, because these Spreaker's designed your show to show up on these devices, and it looks wonderful. Already, when people are looking for these types of products and services, if listeners have a show on Spreaker, automatically those 25+% of people who are currently finding you online will now have the ability to find you online through these type of devices as well. So it's such a very exciting opportunity. Let's flip over again, if we could, and let's talk about your actual show, because I do know listeners may not have an idea for a show. They may be a law firm. I know I'm talking with a gentleman out of Sacramento, California. He's an attorney, and he's very seriously considering podcasting as a method to get the word out. He's start his own show. He'll use his own name, and in this particular case, he'll be able to really go after his local audience, because his competitors, the other attorneys in the area, from what we can find, and I've looked, we cannot find any of them doing a podcast. So in your particular case, let's talk about your show.
Okay.
How do you brainstorm the topic ideas each week?
Well, actually, I usually think about just real life experiences that are happening. We all have them. You just have to pull them out of your hard drive there in your brain. And so one day I'm thinking, what am I going to do for my first show? Because that was the big one, the first show. It's like getting past that first show. And so I thought, I happened to go out to dinner with my Aunt Marie. She's 99. And just came to me. I thought, I'll show my Aunt Marie. So I picked her up and drove her home that night. So I was able to talk with her on the ride home, and I sat with her for I sat with her for probably a half hour, and I just was picking her brain, because when you live to 99, you have a lot to tell. So I happened to just have some questions that I thought would be of interest to my listeners. And I proceeded to ask her different questions about her health and how she's maintained her health, because my aunt doesn't take any doesn't take any medication. She takes vitamin supplements, and that's it. And she's never fluctuated in her weight. And the cool thing is like for myself, I exercise. And she maintains her health and her weight, and she never has exercised a day in her life. Now, as far as the exercise regimen, but she maybe likes to walk or garden, or she likes to swim when she goes to Florida, or up north in the summer. She also swims, but she doesn't have an actual, I'm exercising Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 in the morning for a half hour. So she knows how to do it. Her motto is common sense and moderation. So that's how I came up with my first show.
And what's most amazing about your Aunt Marie, and if anybody needs a little inspiration, I'd highly encourage listening, because the show is named Age 99 and Still Driving, and Aunt Marie still drives her car.
Yes, she does. I think she does a better job at driving than most of the younger generation on the road today.
And then I see you've got 7 other shows, and you mentioned it. I think you kind of you nailed it right on the head. When it comes to coming up with ideas for shows, it's just everything typically that's going on around you. So if you happen to be a chiropractor and you're working with patients every day, they will inspire you to have stories that you can share. Of course, confidentiality can be kept, but you can share the basic stories. I do know when I was talking with the gentleman in Sacramento, the attorney, he's got all kinds of stories. He's a very interesting gentleman to talk to. I do know, Carol, when you and I first started talking, just listening to your stories, I remember thinking, this would be an ideal podcast. This should be recorded. This should be captured and put out there. So to the listeners, and maybe Carol, you could give them a little word of encouragement. I would think that they've got stories all around them, don't they?
Sure, absolutely, James. And I'm so glad that you encouraged me to do this, because for one, you have the Spreaker recording platform, which is so easy to use. And then you just need to brainstorm and jot a few things down. And another cool thing is now you can record. If you have you have an idea in your head, you can just record it on your phone. And like myself, when I get back home, I ended up getting a software called Dragon Naturally Speaking, and then I put that through my computer and it types it all out. So I use that along with pen and paper. But a lot of times if I do write it with my pen and paper, then I have it translated from Dragon Naturally Speaking, and it's typed out for me. So it's just an easy, I think there's a book out there. I'm sure there's a book for everything, podcasting for dummies. So I'm a dummy when it comes to podcasting. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
I was looking at some interesting stats and talking about getting the podcast out. And it really does become the focal point. So what I'd like to talk about with you now a little bit, Carol, and I know you're new to it because we're just kind of working it all through for you, but you've been seeing the layers get peeled back over the weeks as we've been going through things. And this past week, we had the chance to hook up Facebook, not only to your website, but we've integrated it directly into Spreaker. So now that when you do your podcast each week, automatically it gets up. Doesn't it? It gets uploaded to Facebook.
Yes, and also Twitter and YouTube, and everything is automated. So if anyone is thinking about doing this, that it's going to take too much time, just remember the technology is there for us and to utilize it because it doesn't have to be labor intensive.
I remember interviewing Dr. Jerry Anderson also out of Sacramento, California. She's a chiropractor and a very successful chiropractor who does extremely well online now. She's transitioned from the offline world, and now all of her new patients are developed, and they find Dr. Jerry through the internet. And I remember talking with her, and she emphasized, and I'm a big proponent of it as well, how important it is to be continually publishing content each week, because every page of content you create expands your web presence a little bit more and gives just another opportunity for people to find you. And the beautiful thing about podcasting, and I know, Carol, you and I have talked about this a lot, once the show is created, of course, it gets published on Spreaker.com, and then we have a writer that follows up behind you and then writes a very nice 500-600 word descriptive article that explains to the potential listener what that particular show is about. Then a button is pushed. Automatically, it gets published to YouTube. Automatically, it gets broadcast to Facebook, to Twitter, to SoundCloud, and a couple of other sites. In addition, now that we're tying in the podcasting directories through your what's called an RSS feed, a real simple syndication feed, now each of these shows that go live on your site automatically get broadcast out to these 20 or so podcasting directories. So that one little podcast that seems so relatively simple to do these days, and compared to the early days, it is so easy. That podcast becomes the hub, and it broadcasts out. And if you think about it, you've got that podcast published on your site. There's one. That podcast is published on Spreaker. There's two. That podcast is published on Facebook. There's three. That podcast is published on YouTube. That's four. Then you throw in 20 podcast directories. You're up to 25 pages of content, and it took you, the better part of an hour in a week. And all of a sudden you have 20 pages of content now out there working on your behalf. And the beautiful thing about this is, and I had a chance to chat with a chiropractor out of, where state was he, in Wisconsin, I believe. And he was talking about, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, it'll come back to me. Well, but regardless, isn't it amazing what you can do with one little podcast?
It isn't. When you said 25 pages, I have 8 podcasts completed. That's 200 pages from 8 podcasts of content. Something? That is amazing.
And if you were to count up all the hours it took you personally over the last 5 or 6 weeks, because you kind of went on a bit of a blitz in the month of January. So what would you say typically an hour and a half per show?
That would be accurate, yes.
And now 200
because my last show, my number 8, that actually I did pretty much off the cuff. I didn't really have to prepare for that one. The only thing I did was I pulled out a couple letters. I actually sponsor a child, and he writes my son and I letters. So I used that because it's personal experience again. So just like I said earlier, we have so much going on in our lives that just share it with people. It's fun. That's, you make it just like social media. You just make it fun, and it's not a big deal. And so I just highly recommend podcasting.
I recall what I was going to mention as well.
Oh, good.
And that's a very good point. It is fun. It's I've been podcasting for over 10 years. I look forward to doing every show. I always enjoy it. It's great to get done, and then when you're finished, you've really accomplished something. So if you can imagine, many business owners are incredibly busy, and time is valuable, very valuable to them, and you mentioned that earlier as well. In addition to broadcasting out to all of these websites, now because of the smartphones and the tablets, now they also have the opportunity to show up on those. And one thing that we've done for yourself is create a beautiful graphic set, and you've seen them. Your graphics, no matter where you go, whether it be on Facebook or Google Plus or your own personal website or on Spreaker, what do you think of the graphics on your site?
I actually was very pleased with the way they turned out. The colors are inviting. Color is a key when you're preparing to design a graphic. I know that myself, I look at colors, so I was very pleased with that and that with my graphics. And that was another thing I would highly recommend, is that unless you're a graphic designer, you outsource that.
I couldn't agree more. The other thing with graphics, depending on the type of business you're in, of course you want to give that professional feel. So if you happen to be an attorney or a chiropractor, or you own a local pub or a small automotive shop, there's no end to the types of podcasts that can be created. And when you add that extra little bit of extra effort to having the graphics created so they really look good, you've got the professional intro and the outro, you've got the professional voice talent, the host that's going to walk you through and interview you on a weekly basis. By the time you're done, and congratulations to you, by the way, for really digging in and taking ownership of this. 8 podcasts. I see the first one was published on the 1st of January. It's currently the 9th of February, and you've done 8 shows already. So congratulations on that.
Woo woo! Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Carol, I can see we are coming up against the clock and running out of time. Any final words of encouragement to listeners who may be a little bit chicken or maybe thinking it's going to take a little too long? What do you have to say to them?
Well, first of all, I know that most people out there are into social media. I know most people are on their Facebook how many hours a day. I know from my nieces, they are on the Facebook constantly on their phones. And so just transfer some of that time into podcasting, because all it is, like I said earlier, it's just blogging out loud. So if you're on your Facebook or your Twitter, and I know Pinterest is real big too right now, so just take the extra effort and do this, because it is so much fun. You wait, when you do that first one, you're going to be so excited. It's easy to do. Like I said, technology's there for you, so just like the slogan for Nike, just do it.
Carol, thank you so much for joining me for Coffee Talk.
Thank you, James. It was a pleasure being on your show.
To learn more about James Martell, the School of Internet Marketing, and how you or someone on your staff can quickly and easily learn how to develop a successful online presence for your personal or corporate brand, visit theschoolofinternetmarketing.com. That's www.theschoolofinternetmarketing.com.